Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Simmermon.
Hi, folks. So, if that intro didn't do it, you should know that my head has been exactly the same size since I was in the 5th grade. I had an amazing growth spurt from the neck up, and my head got this big, and my voice changed to this, and then I had this little spindly body that I could propel it around with. And I left my suburban neighborhood, and I was bused to a special school for children that had extraordinarily large craniums, where my nerdiness was more of a protective camouflage or kind of a blood over the doorway, and I could get through, you know? And my friendships in the neighborhood I actually lived in began to change, and I don't know if it was all the weird growth spurts everybody was going through at the time or what. But these guys, the Golden brothers, have been my friends for a while, and then they started tackling a little too hard when we played football, like in somebody's yard, and that sucked, but I got used to it. And then they started tackling me when we played basketball, and that was problematic, but, you know, whatever. It's the exuberance of being, you know, in grade school. Then their rocks started showing up in their snowballs at wintertime, and I just had this instinct that, like, when we were all at the hill sledding, as the sun began to drop, and there's other people around, like, that was cool, but you didn't want to be just the guy that was there with the Golden brothers and their 8th grade buddies who were old enough to have nasty little weasel penis mustaches draped over their lips that were sometimes silver from the paint. And it was really when one summer at the pool, they grabbed my little sisters, 3.5 years younger than me, and they held her under the water way longer than I would have when I held her underwater. Because I knew, you know, we were close, but I could see her thrashing around under the water, and I would race to her to knock them away and get her up, and the bigger guys held me back, and I was lunging against them and crying, and I was tears and spit, just stuff is coming out of my face, and there's no adults around anywhere because it was 1986 and divorce was really fashionable, and everybody was so busy getting divorced they weren't paying attention to their kids. Nobody had invented helicopter parenting yet, so you just had to go deal with yourself until dinner time. Just Lord of the Flies. And they finally let her go, and she came up and took this huge, like she had to breathe for a minute before she could start crying, and her lips were all blue. And I hugged her and held her close, and I don't remember how we got home, but we got home, and that was fine. And then I was like, well, that friendship's over. Fuck it. My father had been giving me some really good advice about being in fights, but to a 5th grader, it was logically complicated because he said, never pick a fight, but if there's going to be a fight, you want to throw the first punch. That's your strategic advantage. And I was like, right. Got it. Some of my buddies from my Muay Thai gym are here, and they know I still struggle with that. And then he said, you know, if you're going to lose a fight, don't just ball up. Like, make them work for it. Like, really make them not want to beat you up again. And I was like, right. Okay, so I was riding my bike home from the comic store one time, and there was all these dudes at the basketball court, and I heard some insult, and I forget what it was because there was a sound that moved through my head and body of just a dry stick snapping. It was just like, it's over. And I very quickly decided that it was going to be a fight. I was going to go ahead and throw the first punch, and I was prepared to lose because fuck it. So I rode my bike right into the crowd like a burglar doing a smash and grab through a plate glass window, and I'm just guys around me, and I'm just kicking nutsacks, like just left and right, like fucking I'm gonna deal with this any way I can. And then some of the 8th graders said, hey, they literally said this. They said, hey, that's fighting dirty. That's not fair. Hold him down. Let's get him. They held me down, and they just kicked me in the face and the ribs over and over over and over. They cracked one of my ribs, and every time I tried to pick my head up to get away, I got a shoe in the nose. So I just had to turtle up and take it until they got tired of it, and I finally got to my bike and rode home. And I was wobbling all over the place. I almost got hit by a UPS truck on the way home, and I was ashamed and afraid to see my dad. And I just laid in the back of his pickup truck and looked up at the sky and watched crows circle around until I could get myself together and go inside. You know, I wrote jokes for this story, but that wasn't one of them. So I went in, and from then on, I was terrified to go outside. It was okay in my house. I had a wonderful, loving family, and my dog could always tell I'd had a terrible day, and I'd come home, and he'd come up to me and kind of lie on me for a minute. And but when I went out in the yard, outside of the yard, bets were off. One time I was coming home from school, and they would wait for me in a pack outside, and they surrounded me and opened my bag and took all my comic book money and took all the books in there and stuff, and said, "Did you save anything for us from lunch?" And I've always really had a bigger mouth than survival instinct, and for some reason I was just like, no, maybe you should have beat me up before lunch. And they beat me up, and and I was just filled with this incredible rage, even bigger than my skull, and I didn't know what to do because it didn't belong at home. And that summer, those guys, the Golden Brothers' father, just dropped dead of a heart attack on the tennis court, on a Saturday morning. He was just playing a game, served it up, and then fell over. And when I heard the news, I was just, part of me was like, oh my God, if my dad had died like that, if I just lost him, I don't know what would happen to me. But another part of me, a much bigger part of me, thought, well, that's what happens. God sees you fucking around, and that's it. And I thought the cycle is now complete. I can go outside. They have learned their lesson. And I was wrong. Real wrong. I was probably going to lose those teeth anyway. But I lost some teeth. And I was just, again, just filled with this fury that was so much bigger than a kid knows how to process. And at that time, it was 1986, there was no caller ID, there was no Star 69, but Blue Velvet was on pay-per-view. And I watched the preview. I certainly didn't watch Blue Velvet because, like I said, I had a loving family. But I saw the previews for it, and seeing Kyle MacLachlan in the closet with the stripes of light on his face, and then Isabella Rossellini screaming into the phone when she's just like, "What do you want from me? Leave me alone!" I just boiled into this sense that only a fifth grader could make, and I came home from school one day, and I took my parents' phone into the closet, and I just sat there for a second. Underneath, I can remember feeling my mother's dresses against my forehead, and I was sitting on this pile of my dad's shoes. And my dad, he always chopped wood on the weekends, and he could fix stuff, and his boots smelled like diesel and cut grass, and my dad always knew exactly what to do. And I wanted to kind of conjure that and take it into me. It was a very voodoo moment for a fifth grader. And I just grabbed one of his shoes, and kind of like Dennis Hopper in the preview, I was just like, and then I kept that breath rhythm going, and I just called up their house, and I was like, I'll figure it out when they pick up the phone. And their mom picked up the phone, and she said hello, and I just kept breathing. And then she said, who is this? What are you doing? Who is this? Is this some kind of a joke? And I just waited until she finally said, what do you want? What do you want from me? And I just said, I want the boys. Huh? Who is this? Give me the boys. What do you want with my sons? I see them when you don't. I know what they're doing when you're not paying attention. I'm in 5th grade. And I could just feel like this, I could feel the tension grow and grow, and I could hear her sort of shake. And like, there was no call, like I said, there's no caller ID at the time. I'm sure the cops could have run a trace on this, but it just never came up. And she was just, ah! And threw the phone down. And I felt in control of my life for the first time in months. Nobody tells you, like, out loud. Nobody ever says it's not good to psychologically terrorize a grieving widow. But if they were to tell you that, what they wouldn't tell you is what I'm about to tell you now, which is that there is a definitive upside to that experience. Because if you have nothing but your imagination and your vocal cords, and everything outside of your house is terrifying and brutalizing, you'll do whatever you can to find some kind of control just to feel normal and in charge of some shit. And nobody, I didn't know then what I know now, which is that everybody is the hero and the victim of their own story, right? And if you feel like enough of a victim, you will do some terrible things just to feel like the hero again. All I knew was that every time I left my yard, I got beat up real bad, and that family had to pay. And it was a real shame that they lost their dad, and it was a real shame that their mom was getting it, but it's a real shame I was getting beaten up too. This is how shit goes. So I would come home from school and I would sprint home. And I remember the guys circled me one time and one of them had a switchblade and he popped it and he held it up against my coat and he was pressing it up against my ribs right where they cracked it. And it was still injured because it takes a long time to heal a cracked rib when you're in the 5th grade. And they were like, what do you got for us? What do you got for us? And I was just thinking, like, the only thing that stopped me from just peeing in my pants and falling down and crying and begging them to leave me alone was thinking, I'm gonna get through this, you're gonna put that knife away, and your mom is fucking getting it, buddy. She's getting it good, too. And I went home, and I just took the shoe. Couple hits of a grown man knowing what to do. What do you want? And you know what I want. Your suffering has only begun. I would just borrow lines from other previews that were on the pay-per-view channel. I couldn't watch horror movies, but I could quote them like a motherfucker into the telephone. You'll know this nightmare is over once you wake up. And I would just tease it out, and then like that, and I would hang up the phone, and then I would go eat some graham crackers and milk with my mother and practice drawing the X-Men on graph paper so I could get the proportions just right. And then one day I called, and I did this for weeks, maybe a month and a half, 2 months. One day I called Doe. I don't know who got to her, but I called and it was just like, and she just didn't do anything. And it's really hard to keep breathing like that, especially with your tiny little underdeveloped lungs. And I just ran out of gas and I was just like, hold on. Keep your shit together, okay. And she just sat there and didn't say anything. And it was just like this non-verbal showdown at high noon. And then I heard her light a cigarette. Smoke it. She took a couple drags. I was like, what in the fuck is this woman doing? Oh my God, I just look at the word fuck, you know, it's like working into a sentence in my head. Oh my God, what now? And she cracks a soda open, I can hear it hiss. And she poured it into a glass full of ice, and that fucked me up because she sat down next to the phone with a pack of cigarettes and a lighter and a glass full of ice, got a soda and everything, and just waited and just listened to me breathe until I couldn't breathe like that no more. And she just drank the soda and smoked the cigarette, and we just sat there and listened to each other, and she heard me shift around on my dad's shoes. And I heard her smoke a whole Virginia Slim, drink a Diet Coke. We didn't say anything. We just both hung up. Nothing ever happened after that. I went outside that afternoon, and my dog was jumping up and down and freaking out because the Golden Brothers had been coming over to my house and lighting firecrackers and throwing them at my dog. That was their fun thing to do. We'd find busted up firecrackers and like singes on my dog's fur. We never caught him doing it. And he was just like snarling and leaping and growling. And there was a kid at the end of the yard wearing a Frankenstein mask, like one of those bullshit ones with the rubber band on the back that came with a plastic jumpsuit with a picture of Frankenstein on it. Remember those Halloween costumes that totally used to suck? And this kid had the Frankenstein mask on. He was jumping up and down and barking at the dog and throwing rocks at him. And I just lost it. Like, I just lost the only thing that gave me any sense of control. And I was like, what am I supposed to do now? And I just picked up rocks. I might have had a big dome and a tiny body, but I had an arm on me, boy. And I was just whipping him. And I hit him in the chest, and he kind of went back. And then he moved forward and was throwing more rocks at my dog and barking at him and jumping up and down and just whipping it up. And I was like, what is this? What do you want? And I finally took a rock and I threw it and bounced it right off his fucking forehead. And it cracked his Frankenstein mask and some blood came out. And I thought, awesome. But I also thought, oh God, now what? Like, you just step through this door and you don't know what's on the other side, but you just got to kick some nutsacks until you figure it out. And I've done enough of that for 1 year. And then he kept doing it. And he's bleeding on the mask, and he's still, like, more slowly, like, mocking my dog. And I ran up and I was like, well, I guess I'm going to just lose another fight. And I jumped over the fence and I snatched the mask off of him like this. And it was the kid with Down syndrome from down the street. He had been, save your pity, because he'd been hanging out with those assholes, and he thought that throwing things at my dog was how you spent an afternoon. Retarded people are allowed to be assholes too, okay? Like, just because they are cognitively disabled doesn't mean they're not pricks. This guy was getting tutored. So, but yeah, I was like, oh, this is where we are. So I just looked at him and I took his mask and I was like, oh, I'm not, just go home, man, just go home, all right? I took my shirt and wiped the blood off his head and I was just, go on home, like, let's deal with this later. And that was kind of when it hit me, and I've only just been, at 35, I'm able to articulate it, but it hit me as a 5th grader that, you know, evil moves through our lives, and it's just this black centipede made out of bullshit. And when it touches you, it infects you, and you just mimic it. And it's just constantly moving, and it's constantly doing things, because the world is full of good people who would never do a bad thing unless they had a good reason. And the only way to stop that centipede from chewing right through your heart is to look at it, know what it is, and say, you know what, I've got a good reason, but it stops here. Eventually we moved. I kept getting bullied, but I didn't do any of that stuff anymore. Just wrote it out, and then I grew up. Thank you.
Holy shit.